Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. According to a report by Iran's state-owned press TV on June 22, after the United States launched airstrikes on 3 key Iranian nuclear facilities, the Iranian parliament approved a measure to close the Strait of Hormuz in response. In response, some American politicians immediately came out and made statements. Reuters, CNBC, and other media reported that U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Rubio called on China to dissuade Iran from closing the Strait of Hormuz in an interview with Fox News. He anxiously said, "I encourage the Chinese side to call them, because China heavily relies on oil from the Strait of Hormuz." O'Brien said that if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, it would be economic suicide, because Iran's oil exports have to pass through the strait. He said that if they do this, it would be another terrible mistake. If they do this, it would be economic suicide for them. The United States is keeping its options open on this issue, but other countries should also pay attention to it. This would cause even more serious damage to the economies of other countries than to the United States. He added that he believes the decision to close the strait would be a major escalation and would warrant a response. Not just from the United States, but from other countries as well. Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Gui Jiaquan said that the Persian Gulf and its nearby waters are important international channels for goods and energy trade. Maintaining security and stability in this region is in the common interest of the international community. China calls on the international community to step up efforts to de-escalate the conflict and prevent regional instability from having an even greater impact on global economic development. The trouble was caused by the U.S. itself, but now the whole world has to pay the price. It's believed that the situation in Iran will become another focal point in the China-U.S. rivalry in the future. The U.S., especially with Trump's unilateral actions, is once again causing its allies to drift apart. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, summit will be held in The Hague, Netherlands, from June 24 to 25. On the eve of the summit, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba canceled his attendance, and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung also decided not to participate. Since NATO first invited Asia-Pacific countries to attend the summit in 2022, Japan and South Korea have participated every year, but this time both are absent. Analysts believe this is a setback for the U.S.'s attempt to rope in Japan and South Korea to contain China. Let's talk about Japan first. According to a report by Kyodo News on the 23rd, the Japanese government announced that Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has cancelled his plan to attend this NATO summit, and Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya will represent Japan instead. Japanese officials revealed that Shigeru Ishiba considered skipping because the U.S. military's attack on Iranian nuclear facilities caused the situation in the Middle East to deteriorate rapidly. Fuji TV in Japan provided a deeper analysis, suggesting there were other reasons as well. For example, the meeting between NATO and the so-called IP4, that is, the 4 Indo-Pacific countries, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea, could not be held as a summit because the South Korean president had already announced his absence. On top of that, Shigeru Ishiba had originally hoped to meet with U.S. President Trump to push forward progress in the Japan-U.S. tariff negotiations, but now it seems that might also fall through. A report from Kyodo News also mentioned that the Japanese government has decided to raise its defense spending from around 1%, where it has long stood, to a target of 2% of GDP by fiscal year 2027. If the U.S. insists on demanding 3.5%, it could become a new source of friction in Japan-U.S. relations. 3 days ago, on the 20th, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi rather casually announced that Shigeru Ishiba would visit the Netherlands from the 24th to the 26th, and planned to discuss concrete cooperation between Japan and NATO under the shared understanding that Europe and the Indo-Pacific are closely linked. But in the end, this grand plan just couldn't keep up with the changes. Now, let's look at South Korea. According to a statement released by South Korea's National Security Office on the 22nd, President Lee Jae-myung has decided not to attend this NATO summit. Since being invited in 2022, former President Moon Jae-in maintained a close relationship with the U.S., and over the past 3 years, South Korea has never missed a NATO summit. The official reason given by the South Korean government is that they had discussed whether President Lee Jae-myung should attend this NATO summit. After taking into account several urgent domestic issues and uncertainties like the situation in the Middle East, Lee Jae-myung ultimately decided not to attend the summit. South Korea will coordinate with NATO for other government officials to attend on his behalf. The Chosun Ilbo pointed out that some in diplomatic circles believe that if Lee Jae-myung does not attend the summit this time, it may give the impression that South Korea's diplomatic direction has changed. Looking at these situations, the absence of Japan and South Korea from the NATO summit seems on the surface to be due to the worsening situation in the Middle East and busy domestic affairs, but there may be deeper reasons behind it. First of all, a series of policies from the Trump administration have acted like a double-edged sword, having a profound impact on both Japan and South Korea. There have always been disagreements between Japan and the US when it comes to tariff negotiations. Japan's economy relies heavily on import and export trade, and car exports are one of their economic pillars. The Trump administration's push for reciprocal tariffs has put enormous pressure on Japan. Shigeru Ishiba originally hoped to have a one-on-one meeting with Trump at the NATO summit to push for progress in the Japan-US tariff negotiations. However, looking at it now, this plan has fallen through as Shigeru Ishiba canceled his attendance. South Korea wasn't spared either. Trump once lashed out at South Korea for imposing high tariffs on American goods. Although South Korea argued that the actual tariff rates are very low, this still cast a shadow over Korea-US relations. As for the sharing of military expenses, the demands from the Trump administration have given both Japan and South Korea a real headache. Trump has always stressed the U.S.'s contributions in protecting its allies militarily and has asked Japan and South Korea to increase their defense spending. Both Shigeru Ishiba and Lee Jae-myung feel that this is too much of a burden. There's no point in attending the NATO summit just to be pressured again. Besides, the uncertainty over whether Trump would attend the summit was also a key factor in the decisions made by Japan and South Korea. Because of the tense situation in the Middle East, the leaders of Japan and South Korea might not even get a chance to have one-on-one talks with Trump on key issues, which has also dampened their interest in taking part in the NATO summit. On the other hand, the U.S. military's airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities have made the situation in the Middle East extremely tense, posing a potential threat to Japan and South Korea's energy supply and economic security. Japan and South Korea are both major energy importers, and their economic development relies heavily on oil supplies from the Middle East. If the situation in the Middle East spirals out of control and Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, global oil prices are bound to skyrocket. For Japan and South Korea, this would significantly increase their energy import costs, which would then impact various domestic industries like manufacturing and transportation, dragging down economic growth. At the same time, both Japan and South Korea are also worried about getting dragged into the conflict. As allies of the United States, if Japan and South Korea attend the NATO summit at this time, it might be seen as supporting U.S. actions, which could drag them into the conflict. Japan and South Korea are actually trying to win over ASEAN countries, but among ASEAN members, Malaysia and Indonesia, both Muslim countries, have already expressed opposition to the U.S. approach. By skipping the summit, Japan and South Korea can avoid unnecessary trouble. Lastly, and most importantly, there's the China factor. The new leaders of Japan and South Korea have stated that they want to focus more on domestic economic development. In recent years, when Japanese and South Korean leaders attended the NATO summit, it was seen by the outside world as them fully siding with the U.S. in foreign affairs, which led to worsening relations with China. Especially in many industries, because they followed the U.S. in trying to contain China, it actually accelerated China's domestic substitution, particularly in high-tech industries. This has dealt a heavy blow to the traditional strengths of Japan and South Korea. If they keep blindly following the U.S. in being anti-China, Japan and South Korea might end up losing out. Whether it's Shigeru Ishiba or Lee Jae-myung, both intend to improve relations with China. Navigating between China and the U.S. is actually more beneficial for their own country's development than simply siding with the U.S. So, the absence of Japanese and South Korean leaders from the NATO summit may seem like individual actions by the two countries, but in reality, it will impact the security landscape of the Asia-Pacific region, and for China, it's actually a diplomatic victory. In recent years, under the leadership of the U.S., NATO has been continuously expanding eastward, trying to extend its influence into the Asia-Pacific region. As key allies of the U.S. in the Asia-Pacific, Japan and South Korea's active participation in NATO affairs has undoubtedly introduced instability to the security and stability of the region. This time, the absence of Japan and South Korea from the summit has, to some extent, disrupted the U.S.-led strategic plans for NATO, and has also slowed down NATO's expansion in the Asia-Pacific region. From a geopolitical perspective, this will also prompt countries in the Asia-Pacific region to re-examine their own security strategies, placing greater emphasis on maintaining regional security through cooperation rather than simply relying on external military alliances. For a long time, the U.S. has been trying to rally its allies to contain China, with Japan and South Korea playing important roles in this effort. Now, with the leaders of Japan and South Korea absent from the NATO summit, it may indicate that they are starting to exercise some independent thinking in their foreign policies, rather than simply following the U.S. lead all the time. This could have a positive effect on easing China-U.S. relations, and also create more room for both sides to communicate and cooperate on certain international issues. Looking at the environment around China, the absence of Japan and South Korea from the summit helps to ease the tense atmosphere in the surrounding region. With Japan and South Korea reducing their deep involvement in NATO affairs, it also helps to lessen external interference in the areas surrounding China, creating a more favorable external environment for China's development. China can also take this opportunity to further strengthen friendly cooperation with neighboring countries, jointly promote regional economic development and security cooperation, and enhance overall stability in the region. This NATO summit has become particularly eye-catching due to the absence of the Japanese and South Korean leaders, coupled with the chaos in the Middle East triggered by the U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. America's unilateral actions have made the international security situation even more complicated. This also indirectly reflects that cracks are beginning to appear within the U.S. alliance system. To put it simply, the absence of the Japanese and South Korean leaders from the NATO summit shows that the new leadership in both countries has shifted away from the diplomatic path taken by their predecessors in recent years. This includes the previous approach of Japan's Fumio Kishida and South Korea's Yoon Suk-yeol, who fully sided with the U.S. in confronting China. Behind this shift, there's another important factor. After nearly a decade of turmoil, both Japan and South Korea have realized the damage that America's unpredictability has caused to their own development. The current leaders of Japan and South Korea want to return to a more rational and pragmatic approach, easing relations with China, and they don't want to miss out on the benefits of China's economic growth again.